Good morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Dr. Pepper. Another day, another big edition for Georgia in the transfer portal. This has been coming out late yesterday as it relates to Gentry Williams, defensive back out of Oklahoma. We think this is a really fun ad for Georgia here today, and we're obviously going to be talking about that over the course of our time. Also, a couple of great guests join us today, too. Mike Griffith will be here in a moment. Davin Bellamy, before we're done, covering all kinds of ground, including pretty sharp criticism of Georgia out there today from a fairly prominent voice. Not maybe unsurprising, but interesting nonetheless. We'll get to that today, too, and a whole lot of fun in between. It is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Dr. Pepper, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Dr. Pepper. College football and Dr. Pepper. It's a pepper thing.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So the Georgia Bulldogs have made another addition to their out of their transfer portal here. Pretty interesting ad coming by way of Gentry Williams out of Oklahoma, defensive back, now becomes another addition to this 2026 roster for the Georgia Bulldogs. I will tell you that Williams was not really a guy that I necessarily knew all that much about, but in studying him over the course of the last, day or so, since it's become official, you grow to realize there's a lot to like about him, and I want to talk about some of that with all of you here right now. Starting with this, coming out of high school a couple of years ago, Williams was actually a pretty nice recruit inside the top 100. That's where he was ranked. As a transfer, not ranked quite as high because, and this is probably the reason why he wasn't on my radar all that much, he has been injured a pretty good bit. Has missed a lot of time, has not been always available to Oklahoma. And from that standpoint, probably, not all that highly ranked as a transfer right now, but a former top recruit who, and the folks in Norman will tell us this, when he has played for Oklahoma, has proven to be pretty valuable on the field. And I think one of the stories for Oklahoma is, boy, they just wish they had more of him. And it's not really his fault. I believe it's a lingering shoulder injury that he dealt with. It's not his fault that he was hurt, but he has been hurt a pretty good bit. And what the Oklahoma career could have been, I don't know that's come to full fruition. I do think, though, they were very happy with Williams when they had him on the field. And obviously for Georgia, this is a pretty big deal here right now. I mean, every college team plays with a lot of defensive backs on the field most of the time. Georgia's in at least nickel coverage more than half the time. That means 5 defensive backs on the field. That means at any point you got to have a lot of capable defensive backs on your roster. Williams has played some safeties, also played a good bit of cornerback. I think we believe that he's going to be a part of the cornerback story here for Georgia. And for the Dogs on the field in 2025, we would say, I think, that cornerback was a bit of a mixed bag overall. There were some games in which Georgia just had a hard time in pass coverage. Tennessee, Ole Miss, so probably first half of the game against Alabama, where it just seemed like opposing offenses were really getting whatever they wanted. As the season went on, like almost every aspect of the Georgia defense feels like that started getting better, but that was something of a season-long story for Georgia, just struggles in pass coverage, and Georgia giving up, at least to the naked eye, and our memory would lead us to say this, more big plays for the opposing offenses than we're used to seeing. Now, Kirby at various times would also downplay some of this and push back on it just a bit, saying that it wasn't what he was commonly thought of as being. But nonetheless, in press conferences this season, these questions came up over and over and over again. So perhaps if you want to know, why is it that Georgia goes out and gets so many defensive backs here during this transfer cycle, it's the fact that there were so many questions asked in press conferences this year of what's going on with your secondary and why are you giving up big pass plays? And in games like Tennessee or Ole Miss, talking about the October game, why are you in these shootouts with these teams? As an example of this, this is Kirby pushing back on some of that criticism of his secondary after the game against Ole Miss in October, where Georgia had to go on a wild 17-0 run in the fourth quarter just to win it. This is what Kirby Smart said at the time.
I don't see it like you guys do. I don't see it as totally a secondary issue. might be for the fan, the average fan, or the whoever just looks out there. I just don't look at it as it's a completely a secondary issue. There's a lot of factors into things that we can improve on, and we're going to improve on them. You got to be really careful how you do things and what you respond to in terms of, are we getting better at us and what we do? Are we getting better at tackling? Are we getting better at free access? Are we getting better at second long so that we have more third long? There's so many things that go into it that we got to improve on. But I don't look at it and say, oh, we got a poor secondary. I don't think that at all. I think we've got really good cover guys, and we got to put them in situations to be able to be successful.
I do think it's true that what seemed like big coverage busts for Georgia a lot in 2025 is probably more complicated than it initially appears. I think some of those guys, and maybe the Sugar Bowl is an example of this, they were just asked to be in coverage for a pretty long time. When it's a scrambling quarterback like Trinidad Chambliss, Georgia not able to get him on the ground, that just buys time for receivers to run around and get open, almost like you're playing like Turkey Bowl backyard football or something like that. You just keep running around until somebody gets open. And if you run around long enough, eventually you will get open. The longer a play goes on, the more it benefits the offense, more so than the defense, I would say. And so I think Georgia's, for the most part, ineffective pass rush this season probably put the secondary in harm's way, maybe more often than perhaps many of us would have liked. But either way, this is clearly something that Georgia's tried to address this offseason, getting better with that, having enough capable bodies in that secondary to be everything it can be. You bring in a Khalil Barnes from Clemson, for instance. You bring in the safety from East Carolina, the defensive back from USC. You are trying to repopulate your roster after you probably didn't get as much a year ago, especially out of those safeties as you brought in from the portal. You probably didn't get as much from many of them as you would have liked. And so therefore this year, I think that Georgia's going a little higher in the pecking order, a little higher on the food chain maybe, to give themselves a better certainty of hitting on a couple of these guys. And I do think that Williams is one of these guys that, as I said, when he's been healthy, he's played pretty well. And overall, his impact on Oklahoma makes him feel like the kind of player that will thrive, can thrive at a place like Georgia. So one way or another, Georgia probably did need to be a little bit better in its secondary than it was a year ago. More depth would have probably helped do that. Better pass coverage would have probably helped with that as well. In many ways, Gentry Williams, I think, gives you a chance to answer for all of that. And if you want to go back to the start of this season, when coming off a series of injuries and a long time unavailable to the Sooners, when it looked like he might be fully available for the 2025 season, I really like some of the stuff that Brent Venables was saying about Williams at the time. We don't believe this was in a press conference. We can't find audio or video of this. I'm going to read you the quote, though, as it was reported by Oklahoma reporters at the time. This is what Brent Venables says. The Oklahoman had the quote, really pulling for Gentry Williams. He's worked incredibly hard. This is Brent Venables talking. He's been a great leader, which a lot of times when we have guys that are banged up as much as he has, you show up to the building every day in the practice field and you feel like a man without a country, Venables says. So you don't really have the ability to lead. That couldn't be further for the truth about Gentry Williams. He goes on to say, and this is all coming to us via Sooners Wire, who quotes the Oklahoman here, he's got a unique skill set. I like that phrase. He says people see the toughness that he shows up with, the love that he has for his teammates. He celebrates their success, and I think that's helped him stay engaged over the last several years to where he just doesn't give up and quit. Once again, that's a quote from the Oklahoman from Brent Venables, transcribed by a website called Sooners Wire, about the player that's coming to Georgia via Oklahoma, Gentry Williams. And to me, you hear several buzz phrases there that sound very much like every kind of transfer, or really any kind of player that Georgia's going after. Doesn't quit. He's incredibly tough. He stayed engaged while he was injured. He's a tremendous leader. He loves his teammates. I mean, doesn't all of that feel like the kind of thing that Georgia is going after when it comes to transfer players? For instance, that's the same kind of stuff we learned to be true about Zachariah Branch. Completely different position, different school that he came from. But when it comes to come to a place like Georgia, having the impact, all the stuff that Venables said is true about Gentry Williams, we found out that was true about a guy like Zachariah Branch when he got here, a transfer that really worked out. I think you'd say the same thing about Colby Young. Now, Colby dealt with some of his injuries while he was here, but when healthy, that checklist of things that Venables says he liked about Gentry Williams, a guy like Colby Young, completely different position, we'd say, oh, yeah, you know what? That's also the intangible characteristics he brought to the table as well. The point is that whatever position you're thinking about, there is a certain kind of player that Georgia goes after in the transfer portal, in addition to the size specs and the ability to play the game in between the wide lines. You better be an additive fixture to the overall team culture, and it sounds like Brent Venables definitely thought that's what Gentry Williams was. And to hear Williams in his own words here for a minute, Brent Venables complimented him on being a leader even when he wasn't playing. Gentry Williams, before this 2025 season began, also talked about that too, about just how much he wanted to still find some way to contribute even if he wasn't able to play. You'll like this from Gentry Williams in his own words going back to August.
Just doing my role. I'm still on this team regardless if I'm out there with the 11 guys on the field. I'm still a part of this team. I still got to help the guys grow and do my role, and that's just what I was able to do.
I mean, does that not sound like a Georgia player? Now, I listen, I get it. Hey, how do you hold up in pass coverage? That's going to matter more than anything else. And what can you do to add more depth to what we believe is the Georgia cornerback position? That's what we think Williams is going to play here. That's going to matter. We think that DeMello Jones and Ellis Robinson are the two starters there, but you got to have at least somebody else. You better have a nice rotation of three cornerbacks. You better have that. And Williams, we think on the field can be a good player, but when you think about the intangible characteristics that the Georgia transfers and the guys that the Dogs bring to the program have to have, when you hear Williams there talking about being a leader, man, that just sounds like Georgia football to me. That sounds like the kind of thing that Georgia's going after. I'll give you another example here too. When Williams was asked about what he did to use his time wisely while he wasn't playing and how he thinks that helps him in his return to football, once again, when you listen to the words that Williams says, they sound very much like the kind of thing that Georgia players have been saying for a long time. These are the kinds of players that Georgia seems to seek when they go to the transfer portal. Take a listen to this from Gentry Williams again.
You still want to take those mental reps, and I really thank Coach Villar for keeping my mind fresh in the meeting room and always asking me questions, so I felt like I was involved and I'm prepared for the moment.
And has that been translating now that you're back on the field?
I would say so. Obviously I'm still a work in progress, and I want to get better every day, but I can see the growth for sure.
So I like that. I like I said before, when it was first announced that Gentry Williams was coming to Georgia, I had heard a little bit of chatter that I guess he was a name they were considering maybe or whatever, but this is not a player I necessarily knew all that much about, and I have studied up on him over the last little bit. I think I like him. Now, the issue is, well, you got to be healthy, and I totally get that, and I think most of you understand this. Look, if everything was perfect about every player, they wouldn't go in the transfer portal. In other words, what I'm saying? Like if he'd been fully healthy and just thriving, he might be in the NFL by now because he's obviously got a pretty prodigious skill set. In fact, that was the phrase that Venables used in the quote we read earlier, unique skill set. He obviously has that unique skill set. If he was fully healthy to put that unique skill set on display for the last 3 seasons, well, he's not even in college football anymore. So the reason why he's transferring in the first place is because things didn't go perfectly at his last stop. Any player who does transfer, for the most part, that's going to be true about. That's why he's even available to Georgia. So if Georgia can find a way to help him stay healthy, and if Williams can find a way to avoid injury to the extent that's even under your control, I think what he does bring on the field is the kind of thing that Georgia could be very happy to have as it tries to be as deep as it can possibly be at one of these true premium positions, that cornerback spot. And in addition to that, if Georgia brings in a transfer player, and it has brought in several, if it brings in a transfer player, Georgia, and Kirby Smart in particular, wants to be the kind of player that can also fit in well to the culture here and be a good teammate, be the kind of guy that other teammates like, be the kind of guy that's going to like his teammates. And everything we're hearing about Gentry Williams suggests that's what he is too. And I'll sum all of this up this way. Look, Georgia's not the most aggressive team in the transfer portal, and we've asked out loud, well, when you look at how transfer heavy some of the teams that are playing for the national championship are, or in the college ball playoff in the semifinals, should Georgia take a few bigger swings at the portal? Maybe it should. Future years, I think, will give us more information on that. It's not the biggest spending program right now. Whatever Georgia's spending, we believe, is probably being dwarfed by what a program like Texas is spending. I don't deny that. And that's the kind of thing in the future that Georgia's obviously going to have to figure out. But be that as it may, I think if you're a Georgia fan, my hope is that you like what you've seen from Georgia so far this offseason. The main task has been keeping your current roster together. And Georgia's really done that. As Connor Riley told us yesterday, when you look at the total number of Georgia players who've transferred here thus far, it's a shockingly low number. It's like a third of what some SEC teams are dealing with when it comes to transfers right now. Georgia's really doing a good job of keeping its roster together for 2026 of guys who've been here. It's also finding some supplementary pieces to add here, which is what I think Williams is too. I actually really like the way this team's coming together for 2026. I don't know yet what it's all going to mean, but it seems to be pointing in a pretty positive direction. We were all dejected after the Sugar Bowl, and with good reason. The Georgia season came to an end far sooner than most of us hoped. But in terms of how the new calendar year has started and what Georgia's done to make next year feel different than the end of the last couple of seasons has felt, I think it's been pretty good business for Georgia here thus far. Adding some good players, keeping some good players, and putting a roster together that has a really good chance of being a very strong contender in 2026. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, poured today by Dr. Pepper. Glad you're with us no matter how you get to us. Live on video 10 a.m., radio Athens Sports Radio 96 The Rev, podcast wherever you find them, Apple, Spotify, all kinds of platforms. Most of you listen, watch on demand. Some of you do it live. Whatever your cadence is, your routine is, man, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you just being a part of what we do here. It is such a privilege to be able to talk Georgia football here, and I've always liked this time of year in a weird way because, look, I do like the fact that Georgia can dust itself off and shake off some disappointment and just get back to work and get back to the business of trying to put a football team together. And as I mentioned a moment ago, I do like what Georgia's doing as it tries to do all that. I also love the rich, one-of-a-kind flavor of Dr. Pepper. And, man, it is a thrill for me and a privilege. You know, one of the things that's been really lucky for me over the course of my time here at DawgNation Daily is a lot of the great partnerships we've had with sponsors have been companies that I've always had a long-standing relationship with. Well, there isn't anybody who I've had a relationship with longer than Dr. Pepper. Ever since I was a kid, I have loved it. And I tell you, it fills me with a great sense of pride to be able to shout out Dr. Pepper each week here now as a presenting sponsor for our show, to have their name on the desk. Pretty big deal for me overall. And my encouragement to you is we're getting ready to watch a national championship on Monday. Yes, I realize we all wish Georgia was there. I truly do. But the rich, one-of-a-kind flavor of Dr. Pepper is going to be there because when it comes to the college football playoff and Dr. Pepper, it's a Pepper thing. That means as you're watching football, whether it be the college kids on Monday, the pro game on the weekend, whatever, pick up some Dr. Pepper wherever you're doing your shopping and enjoy it, whether it be the more traditional flavors, which admittedly is probably what I'm more about, or you like the blackberry zero sugar. You know, one of the cool things that Dr. Pepper does do, and a lot of people really love this, those unique flavor offerings they seem to roll out each year. That's always a really cool thing. Great response to those. So try some of that if you'd like to. And keep a lookout for those Fansville commercials. Always really funny. It truly is a national campaign that I never really get tired of because you can tell that the people who write them are obviously college football fans. Very funny storylines with all of those. So big thanks to our friends at Dr. Pepper, a part of DawgNation Daily here today. Now, guests coming up before we're done. Always love Davin Bellamy. A lot to discuss with Davin. It's also Mike Griffith coming up in a moment. Prior to that, let me go around the doghouse here today, presented by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. We are, much like Georgia Farm Bureau, homegrown people. It's just the way we are. I am very proud to be from Georgia. I am very proud to be from the South. Therefore, I watch and enjoy college football through that lens, as the lens of a Georgian who supports my state's flagship team, and as a Southerner who's proud of the SEC legacy here in the South. I've told you this before. I have more of a sense of conference pride than some of you do. And look, I'm not saying you're wrong and I'm right. I'm just saying that just what makes us different is, you know, while I don't necessarily openly root for Georgia rivals to win games, I do like the prestige that the SEC has earned for itself because, to me, it just speaks to, I think, what makes us unique down in the South. Everybody else cares about whatever they care about. Most of America cares about the NFL. Down here, though, we say our big brand of football is college football, and we don't love it because it's great. It's great because we love it, and that passion that we cultivate for the SEC has made our team, Georgia, the league overall, better because of how intense all of that is. I take that pretty seriously. I really do. As corny as that perhaps sounds, I really do. And so I'm always going to be on guard for the critics of the SEC. They annoy me. Maybe they annoy you too. But we have had to admit here lately, yeah, you know what? When it comes to what the SEC's brand has been, dominating college football, winning all the national championships, including Georgia right now, who's really supposed to be the standard bearer. Like, if you wonder, well, how come the SEC hasn't played for a national championship the last 3 years? I mean, I hate to say it. You really look no further than Georgia, who has not been in the Final Four the last 3 years, and Georgia with the top coach in college football, Kirby Smart, not at the national championship level the last couple of years. In the post-Nick Saban world, there really hasn't been an SEC team to step into that. And so, therefore, the SEC's been watching national championship games on TV. Georgia in particular has been doing that. And now all these, longtime critics of the SEC, boy, they got fodder to say what they're going to say. Let me give you an example of this. This has gotten some attention this week. Joel Klatt, you may know him, Fox analyst, goes on a show that I think is really good. They do a good job. It's called The Next Round. It's in Birmingham. They kind of do a version of, for Bama and Auburn fans, what we do for Georgia fans. I would say similar in that respect. They do a version of that in Alabama. I think they do a good job. The point is, they had Klatt on the show, have him on regularly, and the question came up of, well, with Kirk Cignetti doing what he's doing in Indiana, is Kirk Cignetti now passing Kirby Smart, and is Cignetti now the best coach in college football? And is Kirby Smart no longer that? And what does that mean for the Big Ten and the SEC? And boy, for Joel Klatt, that is an 81-mile-an-hour fastball right down the middle and the heart of the plate, and he took a big old hack at that, as you would have guessed he probably would. Joel Klatt, critical of Kirby Smart, critical of Georgia within the SEC, and then maybe the SEC overall, about the tarnished reputation of this league. This is what's being said right now. Here's Joel Klatt.
If they win on Monday night, and they, at that point, would have 27 wins over the last couple of years, in the here and now, no disrespect to Kirby Smart, but could you make the argument Kirk Cignetti is the best active coach in college football?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you can make the argument. Some would disagree, but there's no doubt. By the way, Kirby hasn't even been in the Final Four in the last 3 years. I mean, so, that's – 3 years is a long time. That's basically a whole cycle, almost a whole cycle of college players. We are approaching very quickly a roster full of kids at Georgia who have never even played in the Final Four. So yes, absolutely, you can say that.
So that's Joel Klatt saying, not been in the Final Four, no longer the best coach. Maybe Kirk Cignetti is, and then taking that to the narrative of, what that means about the SEC and how far this league has fallen. Joel Klatt's all over that. Here's more from Klatt on with the guys from the next round.
Yeah, I did a whole thing on my show about just narratives and I know you guys might disagree, but I firmly believe in the last 3 years, and certainly this postseason and the last two postseasons, this narrative that the SEC is somehow vastly superior than the rest of college football, that's dead. I mean, as dead as it can possibly be. This idea of the gauntlet of the SEC, dead. At least it should be. Some might hold on to it. I believe that they would hold on to it falsely. And, and so it leads into this idea of well, Kirby's the best coach in college football. Well, no, he's not. He hasn't even played in the Final Four in the last 3 years with good teams, by the way. And in some cases, based on the composite, the most talented team. So Kurt Signetti is doing more with less than anybody, and he's doing it on a stage and at a pace right now that is fairly unprecedented. He did it at Indiana. Guys, Indiana is likely to win the national championship. That blows my mind. It just does.
So there's Joel Klatt on with the next round saying what he said. And listen, I do think there is an extent to which, if you're a Georgia fan or an SEC fan, whatever, I do think that you have to, at least right now, sit there and take some of that, because Georgia, listen, 2 national championships are great. That is a legacy run for Georgia, right? No one's done that in the playoff era. But Klatt's not wrong when he says haven't even been in the Final Four the last 3 years. And listen, the standard for Georgia is better than that. The standard for Georgia is supposed to be better than first-round exits from the college football playoff. It is. And that doesn't diminish anything that Georgia's done prior to that, but people are going to say what they say when you're exiting early from the playoff. And when you're supposed to be the standard bearer in the SEC, they're then going to say the same stuff about the SEC. And Kirby has hung a lot of his, I think, beliefs as a coach on, boy, there is nothing more intense than SEC play. But right now, people are just not believing that, because the SEC is nowhere to be found in a national championship game once again. Now, there are elements of what Klatt says there that I think are either overstated or unfair. For instance, look, the SEC still has winning record within the regular season in these non-conference games against Power 4 teams, and teams like Indiana don't play those games. Ohio State a year ago didn't play one of those games. Michigan, when it won the title year before that, didn't play one of these games. That the SEC plays more of these games and wins more of these games than the other league does. The other leagues do. That's the kind of thing we don't hear referenced very much. But whatever toughness and rigor exists within the SEC right now is not producing a national championship level team. And the critics of the SEC are within their rights to notice that. They really are. They're within their rights to call that out. And what I wish is, man, I wish they had a lot of fire in this league right now to stop arguing over what the system's supposed to be and why isn't anybody following the rules and blah, 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 and just play the game the way that it is. That's what I really wish would happen. I wish Georgia in particular would say, man, we're going to shut up Joel Klatt. We're going to shut up, Danny Cannell or whoever else. We're going to shut these guys up and prove them wrong. To the extent that I'm forced to agree with some of this, I wish they'd shut me up and say, BA, you're wrong for even agreeing with Klatt. But when you have been outside the top 4, when the SEC is not winning at the clip it once was, the critics aren't necessarily wrong about everything. That's the current state. And I do think the ball is in the court of Kirby Smart is the leader of the Georgia program. Greg Sankey is the leader of the SEC. What are you going to do about this? Don't let your critics be right. Don't let them dismiss the SEC. Now, there are plenty more arguments we could make on behalf of this league. For instance, when you look at this offseason overall, the hard work that Kentucky's doing. I mean, they've been very aggressive in the transfer portal. South Carolina's doing. They've had a very good offseason here thus far. That the efforts by the rank and file members of the SEC up and down the pecking order, far more intense than the Big Ten is, I believe. But those tough schedules and those big battles right now are not really producing a national championship level team, maybe because there is too much attrition within the league schedule. Either way, guys like Joel Klatt are going to say what they're going to say. And right now, they seem to have some evidence to say, I'm not sure Kirby Smart's the best coach anymore. I'm not sure the SEC's the best league anymore. And until something happens to change those narratives, those critics are only going to get louder and louder and louder. Ball in the court of both Georgia and the SEC now to do something about that. And that is Around the Doghouse, presented today by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. And of course, as I said before, I'm a homegrown guy. I love being from Georgia, love being from the South, but in particular my state, one of the things I'm proud of is our history of agriculture, farmers putting food on the plates of not just folks in our state and around the country, but really around the world. That's what the great things grown in Georgia do, or the cattle that's raised, all of that. And that's happening here in Georgia. And for a long time, one of the top supporters of our farmers has been Georgia Farm Bureau. And now the same support they've shown to Georgia's farmers, they're showing to you too when it comes to your insurance needs. Got to have auto insurance, home insurance, things of that nature. Well, you say, well, who do I want to work with? Well, how about working with the friendly folks like you find at Georgia Farm Bureau? That's what they're all about, answering your questions, giving you good information. And when you make that decision of who to work with, work with the company that we've said for a long time. Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team. So let's see if we can show on the screen that a way to connect with them. You can find them online and give them a call. Perhaps that we have that we can show to you here. Georgia Farm Bureau, always the home team. Give them a call, 877-404-1050. That's 877-404-1050, or online, gfbinsurance.com. We love having Georgia Farm Bureau as a part of Around the Doghouse. Also love having all of you too. Love having Davin Bellamy coming up before we're done. But for now, on what Joel Klatt said and everything else, let's talk to Mike Griffith here today. DawgNation Daily, poured by Dr. Pepper.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
We will bring in Mike Griffith here. And Mike, you were talking the other day about what Klatt said there in that clip with the next round guys that I like. And look, I come at college football from a very geographic point of view. I am a Georgian, therefore Georgia is my team. I am a Southerner, therefore I'm pretty proud of the SEC. But it's not been great for the SEC, nor from a national championship standpoint, Georgia, over the course of the last couple of years. And I can't fault the critics of the SEC for using this as fodder to further their narratives. I don't think everything that's being said about the SEC is necessarily fair. I think week to week, the grind in the SEC is still more difficult than other leagues. And I would say that it's by far and away still more popular than the other leagues. The TV ratings during the season bear that out. But right now, in terms of winning on the national stage, SEC's not doing that enough. I would say over the course of the last 3 years, Georgia's not doing that enough. So I can't necessarily be surprised or even all that enraged by a guy like Joel Klatt, who does say these sorts of things, saying this here right now. What say you?
Well, first you consider the source. I mean, to your point, look, the SEC hasn't won a title. It'll be 3 years now. And Klatt trying to say that, Cignetti's better than Kirby on this. I mean, it's a small sample size when you look at Kirby's record against, top 25, top 10, producing NFL talent. I mean, there's a lot of things. But to your point, if we're prisoners of the moment, that's a convenient narrative, even more convenient when you consider that Joel Klatt works for Fox, which is contracted with the Big Ten for television-wise. So he's kind of patting the league on the back, and I get it. BA, I kind of compare this to college basketball. And I went to Michigan State, right? And I don't talk a lot of Michigan State. You know that. I'm not some guy that carries green and white pom-poms and scoreboard watches on Michigan State. I don't really follow them. That was a long time ago. And, my career has been in the SEC, and it's been my passion as well, like yours. But do you know that Michigan State is the last Big Ten team to win the national championship in basketball? And do you know that was 2001? And yet I would suggest to you that between 2001 and now, the Big Ten has mostly been a better basketball league than the SEC. Now, of late, the SEC's done well. But we could point to Florida's back-to-back titles in 06, 07, certainly last year. I believe Kentucky's got a title in there. We've seen SEC teams make the Final Four. But I don't think that's an accurate representation of how good the Big Ten's been, that they've had this title drop. But what's happened is we've turned football into a tournament sport. And so now it's who does the best in the tournament. It's not who's the best during the season. It's not who's the best roster. It's not who's the most talented. It's who does the best in a tournament. And I make the case, and I fully believe this, and all you got to do is look at the starting lineup. No Gabe Harris, no Drew Bobo, Raylan Wilson goes out in the first year. Attrition matters. It matters when you play 7 games where you have to come from behind. And Georgia did so successfully 6 times. When you're in the nip and tuck battles every single week, it takes a physical and mental toll on a program. And I think that the Big Ten benefits from being top heavy, much like I would suggest the SEC's benefited in basketball in some of those early years with being somewhat top heavy. You said, well, there were 3 or 4 good basketball teams in the SEC. And after that, there was a lot of garbage. Remember, they were only getting 3 or 4 teams in the tournament, right? Yeah. Big Ten was getting 7 or 8. ACC was getting 8 or 9. But the SEC was winning titles. Now, we weren't going, well, the SEC's the best basketball. We knew better than that. We knew better than that. And now, the Big Ten they got 18 teams now, by the way. This may be the first year in 20 years that the Big Ten has more players selected in the NFL draft than the SEC. The SEC has held that mantle of having the most players drafted, the most talent-rich conference. They still may have the most per team. We'll see how this year's draft works out. But as of the moment, yes, the Big Ten is better at this moment, maybe in talent, and certainly with Indiana. I'm not convinced about Ohio State. Ohio State beat Texas by a touchdown. Georgia beat them by, 35-10. So Indiana, though, has found the cheat code with these older transfer players, and Cignetti has done a great job using the system to his advantage.
Okay, so I'm going to give you a run-on sentence here, so I want you to try to follow it. And then when I'm done, I want you to tell me if you agree. Because I think there are a couple of things that are simultaneously true. On the one hand, it may just be a fact that the week-to-week grind of the SEC is now making it more difficult on this league to produce a national championship-worthy team. I do believe that grind exists. I think the TV ratings bear that out. People in the regular season just like watching SEC football more than they like watching the Big Ten. Like, you look at the 20 highest rated games of the season, the majority of those games included at least one SEC team, if not two. This league is thought to play a different brand of football week to week during the regular season, and there are a million different metrics, I think, that point that out. And it could be that that is now making it more difficult to produce a national championship-worthy team because of how hard you have to fight against everybody. As I mentioned before, Kentucky, South Carolina, these are bottom-feeder SEC programs that are having actually really good off seasons right now in terms of the transfers they're acquiring, or in South Carolina's case, the talent they're holding on to. This is just a really tough league, and it may make winning a championship hard because of how hard you have to fight just to get out of it. Here's where the run-on sentence comes. But at the same time, I think you can also point to erosion within the league, with the league, because they are slipping from a draft pick standpoint. They aren't winning the playoff games the way they once did. You get a situation where, some of the bowl games don't matter. Some of them do. Vanderbilt played with most of its regular guys and got beat by Iowa. That's not a good look for the SEC. That's not we tapped out, we had a million opt-outs. In the case of like Vanderbilt, who had success in the league, they didn't have that against Iowa. They still lost the game. The point I'm getting to, Mike, is I think both these things may be true. I do think the grind of the SEC makes winning a championship tough. But I think if you only lean on that, I do think you miss the fact that the SEC is not playing the current game, all the things that college ball currently is. They are not playing that as well as some other programs are. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, to some extent. I think another thing is the talent dispersal is a lot more even in the league, because there's more programs with resources, and so there's more parity. And you don't have the maybe the top heavy effect. The bowl games, I'm pretty much done with the bowl games. I just don't think they matter anymore. Kirby Smart made a reference to mid-tier bowl games, and why he would be okay if the playoffs were widely expanded if it was done right. Because the mid-tier bowls, the players, it's just a completely different season. And right now, a lot of these guys are in transition. And let's face it, if you're not in the playoff, nobody cares. They just don't. It's not the same event. It's not the same, way to end a season. And, as far as Iowa beating Iowa State beat Iowa. Who knows where these guys' minds at? It probably meant more to Iowa to be there than Vanderbilt. I flash back to last year, Michigan beating Alabama in a bowl game didn't mean anything to me.
But the SEC's not winning the playoff games either. You know what I'm saying? Like, it can't all be, well, this doesn't mean as much to us as it does to them. It can't all be that. And there is no bigger SEC homer than me. I'm telling you right now, I have enormous sense of Southern pride. But every time the SEC loses a game, it can't be shrugged off as, it had some injuries or it meant more to the other team than it did to us. Like, it can't be that every single time, because eventually the emperor just has no clothes.
No, I'm with you. And Indiana certainly undressed Alabama. I don't know what was left of Alabama, but that was lopsided. But other than that, A&M and Miami, one-score game. Miami, Ole Miss, one-score game. SEC teams beating each other. Ole Miss beating Georgia. Alabama beating Oklahoma. I don't know that there was a large enough sample size. I will say this, Indiana has looked like the most dominant team, but I don't know that I'm ready to say that meant that the Big Ten was all that this year, just because Indiana looks like the most dominant team. I've got questions about Ohio State. I don't know how good Ohio State really was. They beat Texas by a touchdown. That's really all we know. Outside of that, there really wasn't a lot of evidence of Big Ten, beating up on teams out of conference in the regular season. Again, I throw the bowl games out because I know it's its own season, And I know that a lot of these guys are in a transition. They're not playing for anything anymore. It's an exhibition game. It's almost like a glorified spring game to some extent. So I hear what you're saying. I understand it. Did I think Miami was that much better than Ole Miss? No. But I thought at the line of scrimmage they were better. And I thought Ole Miss Georgia was a toss-up. I mean, Miami was what, the number 10 seed, and yet they've marched through the playoff again. The thing that I underscore is that this is now a tournament sport, and that I don't think it's representative of the regular season. And therefore, I don't think that, I can make a grandiose statement based on a tournament any more for football than I think we can for basketball. And again, the evidence that I put in front of you is how good Big Ten basketball is. And I can tell you, I cover that league. I mean, it's incredibly intense. Now, the SEC has recently caught up to that in the last couple of years. But, when I came back to the South in 2016 after that 4-year stint in the Big Ten, it's night and day. How deep the Big Ten is, how intense it is, how much they care about basketball, how good it is, how good everyone is in the Big Ten. And then you go to the SEC, and there was just a lot of bottom feeder teams for a long time. And yet they would have some teams that got hot at the top. So it's 3 years. I know that seems like a long time. You can say that I'm, kind of hedging on this a little bit. I don't know. What do you do with the Michigan championship? That was kind of its own outlier situation with Harbaugh and Connor Stallions and some of the violations. Is that really a legit champion? Did they beat Alabama without that sort of advanced scout? I don't know. I'm not really sure. That was Nick Saban's, last game there, but I'm not convinced that the Big Ten is better than the SEC. Right now, they have had a better season, but I think top to bottom, Brandon, I'm going to tell you, I still think the SEC is the best league top to bottom.
Well, certainly week to week, it's far more entertaining. And I think, as you say, I think there is a big difference between the tournament and the regular season now, playoff and regular season. And obviously, I don't think anybody does it week to week better than the SEC does. But I understand why that's not a very convincing argument to the league's critics right now. I think I understand that too. Let me finish with this, if you don't mind. There's obviously plenty we could talk about, but let's give a quick shout out here to Georgia basketball tonight against Ole Miss. Still in the top 25, although they do drop a bit after a loss last week to Florida. But hosting Ole Miss tonight, Ole Miss obviously not having a great season here at the moment. I mean, to me, when it comes to these Wednesday home games where you don't have the same environment you do on a Saturday, you just got to try to find a way to win your home games, right? You got to try to find a way to make what's, I think, supposed to be an easy-ish game somewhat easy. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, but a chance for the Dogs to continue to build on a resume by securing a home win here tonight against Ole Miss. Give me a couple of seconds on that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, to your point, you got to win your home games, right? You got to win your home games and steal a few on the road. They did a nice job, winning a nip and tuck battle at South Carolina. South Carolina was coming off their best win of the year. You're catching Ole Miss coming off their best win of the year, and they knocked off Missouri Saturday. I mean, look, this is a big team that shoots the three, and they got a great coach in Beard. It's a Final Four coach. I mean, this is not a pushover game. And I know that now that Georgia's been ranked 5 weeks in a row in the AP and 4 weeks in a row in both polls, you say, well, this is a game they should win. Should they really? I mean, they beat Auburn in overtime, and they won on the road at South Carolina. Florida's gotten hot. They also, clubbed Tennessee pretty good last week. So I don't make anything out of that. Florida's incredibly talented, leads the nation in rebounding. This Georgia team doesn't have a lot of margin for error. That's the bad news. The good news is they got really good chemistry. They got really talented guys. They're fun to watch. They got an explosive scorer in Jeremiah Wilkinson. He can get to the rim. They got a really sharp point guard, and Smurf Millender is a tough-minded kid, little guy out there, runs around everybody, shoots long-distance three. Samto Cyril, one of the best big men in the country. He's in the top 10 in shot blocks. Provides a real rim protector presence that you haven't had. You got to have this guy, though. Samto, BA, he's like Georgia having to run the ball on offense to be successful. You got to have Samto at the point, right? You got to have Wilkinson and Millender play well. Just like you had to count on that Georgia defense not to give up big plays. I mean, Mike White has done a really good job of building a team through the portal that is on pace to make it to the NCAA tournament. But there's a lot of season left. We got to see what happens when adversity strikes. Because remember last year, I think they lost 4 in a row, and they had to kind of get through that. Everybody goes through it. I remember Calipari talking about it last year. And oh, by the way, Calipari's going to be in the building Saturday. I love this guy. I love me some John Calipari. He is so entertaining. He's gone from villain, to now beloved figure because he's so colorful and fun. But Arkansas, a dangerous team that's ranked in the top 20. They're ahead of Georgia in the rankings. So you got 2 games at home. I believe if Georgia wins one of the 2, it's been a good week. Stay on course, stay on par, because I think Ole Miss is very dangerous. You pointed out Wednesday night, home crowd, not the same as a Saturday. Ole Miss coming off their best game of the year. They need this game too if they're going to make the term. This would be a big one for them. And then Saturday, you got Arkansas coming in here, and those guys are talented, and Calipari's Calipari. I think the stak's going to be lit. If the Dogs can get one of the 2, don't know if they stay in the top 25, but the net ranking would be good, and that would give them, I believe, a quad 1 win if they're able to beat Arkansas on Saturday.
All right, Mike, thanks for your time. We'll look forward to talking to you here very soon. DawgNation Daily, poured by Dr. Pepper. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it, B.A. Have a good one, man.
You too.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, so interesting stuff with Mike Griffith, Davin Bellamy coming up in a moment. Before that, let's also get ready to roll into our SEC Through. And before that, let's give a shout out to our friends at Jittery Joe's. I tell you right now, I love Jittery Joe's coffee. It's one of my favorite things to enjoy when I'm in and around the Athens area. A lot of times I'm going to various things, kids game, or just certain things around the Athens area, and sometimes you get there early, get time to kill, or I would do this before high school games sometimes too when you're trying to do some of your prep work. Just pop into one of the local locations of Jittery Joe's, and they're all over the Athens area, and enjoy some of that delicious coffee and just take a break. It feels like a nice thing to be able to do. And the great taste of Jittery Joe's right now, you can also enjoy that in your own home too. The Tack Today coffee, they have it available for you now in K-Cups. That means you can make it at home and enjoy it. The delicious flavor that's been an institution in Athens more than 30 years, voted Athens' best coffee 15 years running. You can enjoy that at home. They even have the commemorative cans, which is really cool. And if you want a great business opportunity here in the new year, Jittery Joe's now also offering some of those franchise opportunities. Turnkey business with a respected brand backing you as you take a step towards your own business and the autonomy that comes with having that opportunity. We think that Jittery Joe's is a great option for you on that. So find out more online, jitteryjoes.com. And if you want to enjoy more of the great flavor of Jittery Joe's, get the Jittery Joe's app. You'll get half off your first beverage just for doing that. All right, a couple of SEC Through stories here today before we get Davin Bellamy. Let's start with Ty Simpson. There had been rumors that Simpson might, after declaring for the NFL draft, do like Carson Beck did last year, Cam Moore did the year before, almost use that as leverage to actually return back to college football. Ultimately, that is not what Simpson's going to do. And there have been on the record confirmation from Simpson himself, I guess, that he was offered as much as, like, say, $6.5 million from Miami, many, many millions from LSU, some of the usual suspects here. And Simpson gave a quote that if you're an Alabama fan, you're going to really like, something to the effect of he didn't want to be remembered as a guy who, took the money to go somewhere else. He wanted to stay as beloved within the Alabama community as he believes he is, referencing Denny Chimes and some of those landmarks on campus. And a lot of people, even non-Alabama fans, like the fact that that seemed to mean something to Simpson. You almost compare that to the Texas quarterback Quinn Ewers a year ago, who also had big offers to go play elsewhere, but just simply did not want to do it. The money that he would make was less valuable to him than the reputation that he thought he had with Texas fans, the program that he said that he loved. Simpson now feeling the same way. One of the things that I do think makes Simpson's situation different from Cam Ward or Carson Beck is I believe that Simpson is going to be a first-round pick. I don't believe, in fact, I know for a fact Beck would not have been last year, and I don't know how secure Ward's draft status would have been the year prior to that. But there are plenty of people who think that Simpson's among the top 3 quarterbacks to be drafted. And so I still think it's better to be a first-round pick than it is to be even a very high NIL guy. But the story overall here, I think, tells you that there is just no thought of, maybe we should respect the House settlement. Maybe we should be afraid of what Deloitte's going to do in terms of approving our NIL deals. The teams that are spending the most are not worried about that at all. And I just think if you're Georgia, if you're the rest of the SEC, this notion of we got to hold people to the House settlement agreement. We got to get them to follow this agreement. They're just not going to. And so the question you got to ask is, what are you doing next? What's plan B? Because plan A of, hey, we all got to play by the same rules. That's not how this is going to play out here right now. And you've got to accept reality on its own terms. Speaking of big NIL stuff, Bill Jordan Seaton, the Colorado offensive tackle, he goes in the transfer portal, and it seems like there's a huge bidding war already starting for him. You may be talking about, by the time it's all said and done, certainly in excess of $2 million, if not approaching $3 million. And once again, the Texas of the world, and especially in a case like Texas, because the one thing they have not spent big on yet is they have not really attracted the offensive linemen yet. They need more of those. Seaton would obviously be an example of this. And with Georgia losing Monroe Freeling, I think some Georgia fans are left to wonder, well, should our program be going after Seaton? Is this a guy that we ought to be considering? I mean, I'm sure that everybody makes overtures to him, but in all honesty, I think because Georgia has recruited as well as it has, this is not necessarily the kind of player you feel like you have to go out and get. A little bit rare to see an offensive tackle prospect of this caliber in the transfer portal. You don't see a ton of that. But with guys like Juan Gast in the program, what do you think Ekene Ogboko can be? Ernest Green, assuming he returns, still waiting on news from that. Honestly, you probably feel like you have some good offensive line talent in the program already, and you've spent pretty big on those players, we're led to believe. So Seaton's a big-time prospect, and he may even be a bigger prospect overall than any of the players I mentioned are thought to be right now. But that also has a way of changing. I think that Georgia recruiting how it has the luxury of not being in this sort of panic-stricken bidding war that exists for a guy like Seaton right now, at least worth considering that. I was going to do another story on ESPN and their newfound love for college football. I'm going to get to that later on. Let me for now say that's our SEC through, and instead get ready to talk to our next guest here. Always thrilled to have him as a part of the program. Always a lot of great things to say. It is Davin Bellamy here today on DawgNation Daily, poured by Dr. Pepper. Davin, appreciate your time. And if you don't mind, by the way, that's a nice looking pullover you got there, the Georgia red and the black, the block letters. That looks really good. Very sharp as always. But the big story this week has been Georgia keeping Nate Frazier in the fold. We're led to believe a program like Ohio State may have come down here, try to steal him, making all kinds of wild offers in doing so. But honestly, Georgia stepped up. And, Davin, I've been saying to our audience all week long, this to me is a huge win. It's not a story in my mind of, Frazier considered going somewhere else. It's a story of, when it's all said and done, Georgia said, we think you're a top-tier playmaker. We're assuming going to pay you like that, and we're going to build a lot of our 2026 offense around you. We need to have you here. I think this is a pretty big win for Georgia in this modern age. What do you think of a story like that?
I think it's huge. And what's really crazy is depending on the position, it's always easy to find, a running back. So for Georgia to go out of their way, and especially Coach Smart with how proudful, he is, if a player is, thinking about leaving, especially at a position where you can find a running back in a dime a dozen, it kind of shows the type of player that he is, that Coach Smart stepped in and was like, hey, you're not going anywhere. But I think it's really crazy just to think about this point right here is now we're at a point now where it's kind of like the players are doing what the coaches are doing. Meanwhile, I say it to say as, some coaches may not ever think about leaving, but if a new job, pops up, they may throw their name in the hat just to get a raise. So we're starting to see players now starting to play that game because, in my opinion, I don't think Nate Frazier was going anywhere. But there are probably some things behind closed doors and small little things in the contract that he was able to get changed from this year and last year. But in my opinion, Nate Frazier wasn't going to go to Ohio State. But it's honestly crazy to watch these guys use their leverage now when years ago they didn't have, no voice.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, even if you're in favor of players being paid, and I have no problem with it, this is the part that I think does frustrate some people, is that the mechanism by which players get paid is by leveraging the thought, well, maybe I'll leave, whether it be, a committed player breaking that commitment to go to a different school, or a player on the roster threatening the transfer, or at least threatening is the wrong word. That's too negative. Just, being open to the possibility of a transfer, that is the way you cash in. And that's the part that I think is frustrating. I think a lot of us would like the idea of, you played well, so therefore you get more money. But the real leverage is you might leave, therefore you get more money. Even those of us who are grown to be okay with the compensation model, the fact that the leverage comes through the threat of leaving, that's the part that I do think bothers some people just a bit.
Yeah, man. And the leverage, playing the leverage game, man, when you start getting to pro football, you never really get into a grown man's, pocket. So
That's right.
whatever going on with his contract negotiations, you're in a professional league. You understand that he's trying to feed his family, but he's still thinking about the team. So the team is not taking that, personal. I think the problem, what you're seeing in college football is guys aren't thinking about the team, and if Nate Frazier was to leave, now Georgia is the type of school that has a plethora of backs, even Dwight, Phillips, who was my favorite back the first 2-3 games last year. We put him on ice. But just to even think about, him being our bell cow, golden goose running back, and him thinking about leaving after you got everything you wanted your freshman year, it almost gets to the point like, what more else can we do to keep you happy? I mean, you're a 5-star guy from California. You've been playing, the 2 years you've been here. You're our bell cow. What makes you want to leave? And I think what's leaving a bad taste in the fans' mouth is just he stayed. So you don't want to call it disloyalty, but it's just what more else can we do to keep you happy? And are you thinking about the G, or are you thinking about the name on the back? And that's where a lot of college players have left a bad taste in college football fans' mouth.
Here's the other thing I feel like I'm noticing right now, and you made mention this a moment ago, like in the NFL, and you were obviously a part of that league, running backs just get treated like Kleenex. I mean, they just get used, they get thrown away, and I know you know a lot of these guys. A lot of these running backs have been furious about that. Like, hold on, how come every position gets paid but us? And that's been a big issue in the league. I do think what's interesting in college football right now, the best that I can tell is that in terms of an allocation of your overall budget, running backs are getting treated from a compensation standpoint better in college football right now than they typically get in the NFL. We're led to believe that Justice Haynes is going to get big dollars. A guy like Nate Frazier probably got very well paid. Other running backs the going rate for top running back may be more than $1 million right now. In comparison to other positions, that's pretty good treatment. Whereas in the NFL, it's like, I'm going to draft a guy in the 6th round, make him my starter, and then 2 years later, I'm going to do it again with a different guy and let this guy go, fend for himself somewhere else after he's gotten 400-something carries in my offense. College running backs right now are not really being treated that way. To me, and you know this better than I do, but this feels like a pretty interesting difference in terms of the player management model in college football compared to what it is in the NFL.
Right. When it comes to the college football and professional football, when we're talking about how do we want to build a team to be the most, successful, usually when it comes to the NFL, if someone has already won a Super Bowl with this type of roster, you start to try, to copy that. When Von Miller and DeMarcus Ware just took over the game against, Cam Newton, that made the other teams go out and say, we don't need to pay one defensive end, $100 million. We need to pay two. Mm-hmm. So the NFL motto is pass rushers first, quarterback, left tackles, receiver. And all those people who getting paid the big dollars, they're circled around the quarterback. The offensive tackle gets $100 million because he protects him. The wide receiver gets $100 million because he needs, weapons. Yeah. The defensive end gets, $100 million because we gotta, get him on the ground. And the DB gets $100 million because, we have to, defend him. But when you start talking about college, like me, you've been talking about all year on this show, you got to be able to stop the run and run the ball. So a running back that is superior, we're talking about Todd Gurley's of the world, Nick Chubb's, Sony Michel's, DeAndre Swift, Nate Frazier's. Those guys, they stand out more in college. In the NFL, you have to be a special guy to, at the running back position to have the same type of productivity that you had in college that you have in the NFL. That's why the NFL kind of looks at the running backs as a dime a dozen. I can find one, in the 6th round.
Yeah.
Because you may not see the same thing you saw in college on the tape from that running back as you would see in the NFL just because, guys are faster. And we've seen that. Top guys that are in college, like the guy from Boise State, right? He looked like a creative player in college, but then you get him to the NFL where guys, everyone is 4'6", and now you have to make the first 2-man miss before you get to the line of scrimmage. So I think college, they understand that a dynamic back is more of a superstar in college than he will be in the NFL, and I think that's why you've seen them getting those big bucks.
Let me ask a couple of things before I let you go. Thing number one, we talked about Gentry Williams earlier, defensive back from Oklahoma, now transferring to Georgia. It seems to me that, a year ago, Georgia brings in some defensive backs. Not to, I'm not criticizing, but, maybe guys who are a little less heralded in terms of the program they're playing at, kind of taking a flyer on them. And in some cases, that didn't really work out necessarily. This year, it's guy who, when healthy, has started for Oklahoma. Safety, who's from the Athens area, started for Clemson. Defensive back, been in a program like USC that obviously only recruits top-flight players. It seems like this year, for its defensive back depth, at least to my eyes, and this is just sort of a knee-jerk reaction, Georgia said, no more flyers, no more, hey, maybe this guy can, handle it at this level. Let's go out and get starter-level players at power programs, and let's see if we can integrate them in what we're doing here. I think it's a very interesting approach that Georgia's taken with what everybody needs, which is more, depth in your secondary because you play so many defensive backs in, nickel coverage at least more often than not. You got to have a lot of depth there. Georgia going to the proven commodities to get that depth. I think that's an interesting alteration of what I feel like the strategy might have been a year ago.
It's needed. It's needed. And I applaud, Coach Smart of, looking in the mirror, because first thing first is, Coach Smart has built his legend off of doing less with more. You talk about Stetson Bennett, he's always good at finding the gems because he believes in his coaching that much, which is honestly great. But also when you look in the mirror the last 2 years as a coach, the same way he asks his players to look in the mirror, how can they get better as a coach? He has to do the same. And I think he did that perfectly by saying, you know what? Maybe I can't go in the transfer portal and not get top guys and think that just because we coach them, we can make them better than what they are. If they were average guys in the transfer portal, that means they left their school for being, average. Then you go dig in the transfer portal and you're trying to find gems. But usually with a guy's in the transfer portal, he didn't make the starting 22 of his last team. Now we are in a different place where starters are leaving, but we're talking about the majority. So if I'm going in there trying to get an average player, thinking if I sprinkle my magic dust on him, he'd turn out to be a 4 or 5 star. We've seen that didn't work. So now I applaud him for looking in the mirror saying, you know what? I am a great coach and I can do less with more, but let me go get some guys that are already proven it on tape to make my job a little easier. And I think you're seeing Georgia starting to go into when we're in the transfer portal, it's not trying to find guys that, okay, middle of the pack, he fits the scheme, boom, boom, boom. We bring him in to our culture, sprinkle some dust on him, he'll be a 5 star. That hasn't been working the last, 2 years. So I like the big home runs that we're starting to hit this year of going after top guys in the portal, because if I'm going in the portal, I only want the top guys.
Yeah.
I don't want guys at the bottom in the middle of the portal. Because in my opinion, I just think they're used goods. And majority of those guys don't end up panning out, and then we had to go get top DBs because Georgia wasn't able to beat Georgia football this year, with the back end. And DeAndre Baker, he talked about this a lot on the show that we shot last week of, Georgia had to play a lot of zone, coverage all year. And that's not a Kirby Smart defense. So the defensive coordinator has his hands tie behind his back because he can't make all the calls that he wants to make because there's no rocket science to playing man coverage. Either you can stay in front of your man or you can't. So in the situations where Georgia wanted to call man, we couldn't call man simply because we didn't have the guys to do it. And then you look at the last play of the Georgia defense, we called man and we got beat. so it's like you damn if you do, you damn if you don't. You know, if you Glenn Shulman, it's like, okay, I'm gonna get blamed for the calls, but I mean, I'm calling man, and I can't call man because I don't have a player. So what Georgia doing right now in the transfer portal is needed. We got to go get some top guys to where we can say, you know what, you take care of that, you know, side of the field. And I remember just playing with DeAndre Baker, and he would make the game plan so easily. He would make it so easy.
Oh, yeah.
They tell him, you got the number one receiver. You probably won't run zone this game. Just follow him from sideline to sideline. That shuts down one side of the field. Not a defensive coordinator can call whatever he want to call because he's not worried about having to protect his corners. So what we're doing right now in the transfer portal is perfect. I want to see us. I know we got a guy from Auburn.
Yes, Amaris Williams.
I was looking for some highlights, you know, on the kid. Couldn't really find any. Those were the two things that I wanted to see. I wanted to see us go get some big name guys in the transfer portal at defensive back and in the front seven, because we know that when we start getting to late in the playoffs, where we are now, why is Miami playing in the championship game, right? You got ends that can go close the game out. We made a big point about Georgia of not being able to affect, you know, the quarterback. And I even raised my hand. You know, I said, you know, I made a lot of excuses. Sacks are, you know, NFL stat, and this team is getting better. They're affecting the quarterback and not getting sacks. Well, when you do get sacks, it makes the whole team job a lot easier. So I think when we start getting to this late seasons, especially, you know, coming into next year, how can the Dogs do better at closing the season out? You do better that with five-star guys on the edge who at any given moment in a playoff game can change the momentum and the swing of a game with a great pass rush. So I applaud Georgia on what they're doing, you know, in the transfer portal.
Okay, so let me follow up real quick, and I don't want to keep you long, but I do want to follow up real quick. It sounds like you like the addition of a guy like Amaris Williams, who body type-wise reminds you of Gabe Harris. Would have been really nice if Harris goes down. You got a guy like Williams who steps in. That Sugar Bowl could have gone very different, right?
Yeah, no doubt. Once we lost, you know, Gabe Harris, just that motor that, you know, he created for the rest of the D-line. Like, Gabe Harris wasn't a guy who, you know, got you 10, 12 sacks. But he reminded me of Javion Clowney, my rookie year, the season that J.J. Watt had 17 and a half sacks. Clowney was just blowing everything up, playing with his hair on fire, that things would just leak out to the other person. And that's what Gabe, you know, was. He didn't have 10 sacks, but we lined him up all over the field. And when he decided to go, he played with his hair on fire, where it just blew up the offense, and the rest of the defense was able to pick up the pieces. Once he wasn't in the game, you just saw Chambliss have his way with guys who were less athletic and didn't have that motor to make the game, you know, difficult, you know, for him. So I love what Georgia did by going to the transfer portal and getting like prototypes.
Okay, let me squeeze in one final thing. I don't want to keep you long, but this came up in the chat yesterday, and I said I was going to ask you about this. It's completely changing the subject. So the other night, the Ole Miss-Miami game comes to an end in somewhat controversial fashion because on the Ole Miss Hail Mary play, and I don't know if you remember this or saw it, there's just a lot of contact that's not called. And I think the general consensus is that the refs don't call pass interference on Hail Mary plays. They just don't do that. And that's just the way it goes, that if you're asking for that call, you're probably not going to get it. But as a defensive guy, here's the thing I was curious about, and this came up yesterday in our chat. At what point in time are the defensive backs coached that way to say, last play of the game, you can get away with anything. You can wrestle the guy to the ground. You can do whatever you want. Holding's becoming that way too. offensive linemen know they're not going to get called for holding. So therefore, I mean, they're just grabbing guys by the neck now because for the most part, that's not an enforced rule, at least the way that it once was. You know, as a guy who's a part of practice, obviously you're not in the defensive back room, but you're a part of practices. Are defensive backs getting coached now, like Miami at the end of this game, to say you're going to get away with any contact you want because officials just swallow the whistle on the final play of the game? I'm curious about that. It's a pretty big deal this week, and everybody's been, to at least a certain extent, weighing in on that. What do you think about those end-of-game situations where it feels like they're called differently than they are at other points in the game?
Well, first, man, you got to think of it like this. When you're watching basketball, right? 2 days ago, the Boston Celtics lost on, a last, possession. And the head coach was saying that it was an illegal screen. Well, 9 times out of 10, and sometimes, on Sundays, they're not going to call an illegal screen on the last possession of a basketball game. The defender is going to have to fight over that screen. So games are called different in all sports on the last play of the game. And to answer your question, I've been at practices where we've practiced last minute Hail Marys. And when the ball is in the end zone, every coach at every level I've ever, been on has said you box the guy out. Now in college football, you can't touch people after 10 yards.
Yeah.
But the last play to Hail Mary when the ball is in the end zone, and we used to put 6'6" Lorenzo Carter back there with a 40-inch vert, to knock it down. And he usually did a great job of that except that one time. But, I mean, they teach guys to box out. So they are coaching it different because in a normal setting, you can't touch a guy after 10 yards. But on the last play of the game, when the ball is in the air and everybody's in the end zone, you're taught to box out. So that play is taught differently. But the people that's on the field, just like in basketball, man, like you're not going to get called for an illegal screen with 5 seconds left and the ball handler has asked for a screen to shoot the pull-up jumper, for the win. The defender has to fight over the screen. That same thing goes in football. On a Hail Mary play, it's barbaric. It's physical touch on every Hail Mary we've ever seen, and it can go both ways every game. And just like in basketball, you don't want to be the ref, and then you got to walk back to your car where you made the call on an illegal screen or pass interference on a Hail Mary, and you have affected the game.
Yeah.
You never want to be that ref.
I think it's a really interesting point, Davin. I'm glad I asked you the question. Always great stuff. Sorry for keeping you long, but really good stuff. Really appreciate that. Of course, remind folks how they can connect with you online. You're doing great stuff on social media, breaking down all kinds of things. No telling what you got coming up in the weeks and months to come. So remind folks how they can get with you on social media.
Yes, sir. Davin Bellamy 17 on the IG, One Love Media, on the IG. The team meeting is dead right now because that's a film breakdown, but we'll be doing, off the clock, episodes with guests on.
Nice.
And then on Twitter.
Yeah, because you had DeAndre Baker on the other day, right?
Yeah, but I had DeAndre Baker on to break down the last play, the third and 5 or the 4th and 5. He did a great job of that. So yeah, man, we're just trying to learn from you, man, and just keep going for real.
Davin, great stuff. Appreciate it. We'll look forward to talking to you soon.
Always. Thank you, baby. You know it. Go Dogs.
Go Dogs, indeed. Love Davin Bellamy, man. And I tell you, that stuff out of Maris Williams, that's really, really good right there because I don't think we've talked enough about that ad for Georgia. I think that's a big get. In the midst of everything else that's going on, probably haven't given that enough attention, but he just slides that in to say, hey, Maris Williams, look at this name. This matters. I like that from Davin. Let's do a golden shoe here and shout out Georgia basketball. We talked about this with Mike Griffith a little earlier tonight against Ole Miss. This is not a commercial, but if you can go, you probably should support this team. They've been fun to watch this year. They got a real chance to make some noise in March. Need this one tonight. That's a pretty big deal. So we'll shout out Georgia basketball for our golden shoe, hosting Ole Miss tonight. Hopefully Stegman Coliseum packed out, making some noise. Typically speaking, a little difference between the Wednesday games and the Saturday games, but maybe they can have a big crowd tonight and make an impact on these Rebels coming in to town tonight. Golden shoe there for that. Lousy, stinking Gators. I've had a long time, so they've beaten Georgia 1,894 days. That is our Gator Hater Updater. Y'all Have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Dr. Pepper. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time, doing the work that's promised for the price that's promised, just taking good care of you for all of those various systems in your house. They'll take good care of you on that. Okay. Winfred Steinspring says on that final play that it was a good no call. Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with that. I do think a couple of things. I think it's interesting, Winfred, that how we watch games when our team is not involved is so different than how we watch games when our team is involved. And I do think we have to keep that in mind. You know, people are mad because holding doesn't get called, for instance, or they're mad because the PI doesn't get called, you know, or whatever else. I just think it's important for us to all remember that the officials, whether it's explicitly taught to them or not, the officials know that the people who are paying the bills want a loose game. They do want it loosely called. You know, they want basketball to be a loose game. One of the problems that college basketball has is, especially late in game, it is not loose. It is called very tight, and you almost have to because it's darn near wrestling. I mean, there's so much contact in college basketball, so you got to call some of it. But it's not loosely called, and therefore it impacts the flow of the game. So when Winfred, not a Miami fan, not an Ole Miss fan, tunes in to say, yeah, I'm glad that's no call, I think it's a reminder for all of us that when other folks who are watching a Georgia game, they don't want it called as tightly as we do. When it's our team, we want everything called. Catch them for this, catch them for that. And if they throw a flag on the opponent every play, we're happy because that benefits our team. But the average viewer does not want that. The average viewer wants a free-flowing game with as little officiating as possible. Just something to keep in mind. Bill Sanders says he watches most games with an analyst eye anyway. Jacob Alexander says he's going to stay at the house tonight. Well, listen, I understand that. No problem. No problem. Joseph Kennedy says we should do more contact. Everyone gets away with it for the most part. I think one of the things that the Georgia guys sometimes get in trouble for is if you give that little look back, it seems like you can get away with everything. You know, it's like if you're chasing a guy down and, you know, you try to do I mean, look, at a certain point, a pass interference is not a bad play if you prevent a guy from getting a 50-yard catch. But you can probably get away with a little bit more as you're getting ready to do the if you can just have a little bit of a look back, that gives you a little bit more freedom, I think. Sometimes when the Georgia guys get caught, it's because they don't quite give that look over the shoulder as if they're looking for the football. Let's see what else. People enjoying Davin Bellamy. I'm liking that. Brian Whitaker says the last 5 minutes of a basketball game takes 30 minutes from all the fouls. Did y'all, and maybe you didn't, the Georgia-South Carolina game on Saturday, I mean, we all say the same thing, right? That end of game takes forever. The end of that, my son and I were listening to it on the radio because we were driving around. The end of that Georgia-South Carolina basketball game took forever. I want to talk about like 20 minutes for like a minute worth of game time. And it was like, oh my gosh. And, you know, I grew up loving college basketball. I really did. But if you want to know why college basketball is not more popular, these end of game sequences where everything is the officials taking a trip to the scorer's table, they're reviewing everything. It was a disaster. So for all the talk of, the end of game takes forever, I mean, the one against South Carolina and Columbia on Saturday for Georgia may have been an all-timer. That game would not end. Robert Brown says Matt Ryan better stay away from Kirby Smart. Yeah, Ryan in his announcement as team president for the Falcons did mention Kirby Smart, and I was kind of on guard for that too, of like, hey, you know, you can draft our players, but don't take our coach. Don't even flirt with taking our coach. I've said this before. If the Falcons even made an overture towards Kirby Smart, if they even made an overture towards Kirby Smart, I would never cheer for them again. I don't care if they won 7 straight Super Bowls. I would never cheer for them again. I don't think they're going to. I think that Ryan was just talking, and it's nice to have a little respect for Kirby, I guess. But yes, I think a lot of Georgia fans noticed that too. Eugene Marine at DawgNation.com writes and say approximately 31% of Division I athletes who enter the transfer portal for a period between 2023 and 2024 remained active entrants, indicating a significant portion of players do not graduate from college. Yeah, I mean, and the most common destination for someone who enters the transfer portal is nowhere. So here's the thing. It is undeniably true that this new system that includes a lot of transfers and a lot of NIL for the top players, it's been bad on average for the average player. It has been, because the transfer portal seems like a pro player mechanism. Hey, I'm in favor of players' rights, therefore I'm in favor of the transfer portal. But the truth is, for every player who benefits from a transfer, there's at least one more who's like, man, I've been here my whole career. Now I'm ready for what I think is my moment, and they just brought in a transfer to take my spot. Like, that's not fair. And if you really had collective bargaining for players, this is the kind of thing that players care about a lot, because I hear from a lot of these players on this sort of thing, is they just want some certainty about who their coach is going to be, some certainty about what their roster situation is going to be. You know, to keep it simple, players want to play. And, you know, the transfer, for every player it helps, it also hurts somebody else. We always forget that. It's amazing to me. All of this has been sold to us under the guise of, oh, this is good for players. My question has always been which players, because for every player you can show a benefit to this, it hurts somewhere else. And we're seeing this with NIL too, where as players get more and more money at the top end, the question you ask is, where's that money coming from? Well, in some respects, it's coming from the bottom of the roster where, you know, and we call this, and this is the easiest thing to predict. We called this a long time ago, is that the bottom of your roster, the guys who are not necessarily in your two deep, but somewhere near the 85th scholarship or the 100th roster spot, those guys are not going to make any money. They're just not. They used to, but as you get into a more efficient process on this, they're going to take the money from those guys, because where else are they going to go? They're going to take the money from those guys and give it to the top guys. So all of this change to college athletics has essentially been done to benefit a small number of athletes. Was it all worth it just for that? I don't know. But I think if you're a fan, or if you're Georgia, you got to be okay with some of this and just play by the rules as they exist. But the rules as they exist only benefit a small number of players. And the average college athlete has a worse quality of life now than he did prior to all of this. But nobody cares. Bill Camacho says, and by the way, good to see Bill in here. He says, do you have confidence in Nate Frazier rushing for over 1,000 yards this season? Yeah, I think I do. He was over 900 this past year. I think I do have confidence for the upcoming year. Johnny Bootlegger says that Ryan Puglisi is only one play away from having the driver's seat. That's exactly right. And this is what some quarterbacks are learning, which is being the backup at a place like Georgia is actually not a bad thing to be. That if you're not a starter at a place like Georgia, you're not going to really be guaranteed a starting spot really anywhere else other than, I guess, you know, Florida, to show you how far that program has fallen. They are taking Tech's backup and promising him the world. But in most cases, the backup quarterback at any school is not going to get a starting promise somewhere else. So being the backup in a system that you know, at a place that you're comfortable, not to say that you're rooting for Gunnar Stockton to get hurt, but injuries happen all the time. And that means you are, as you say, just one play away from being in the game and getting your chance to show what you're all about. That I do think this is one of the things that quarterbacks, by and large, are maturing to in this portal era, which is being a backup quarterback and either learning on the job, getting more experience, or being ready if my moment comes is actually not that bad of a thing to be. Jonathan Aaron says thoughts on Mike Tomlin stepping down from the Steelers. I think it's one of those things that probably had to happen. The Steelers are almost the worst thing you could be in pro sports. They're just stuck right in the middle of, they never have the losing season, which means they don't really get the best draft pick opportunities. They're not really advancing in the playoffs. Even their best era of Mike Tomlin feels like such a long time ago. At a certain point, it's just time for a change because it just stinks to be stuck in the middle, which is where they've been. I do think that Tomlin is a good football guy. I think he had a good career there. Probably time for a change. If he wants to be a broadcaster, my gosh, he's going to have all opportunities that he wants. I don't know that he wants to coach again. Maybe he does. Maybe he would want to coach again after a brief hiatus. Sometimes that's what guys do. I do wonder. There has been a lot of chatter on the Notre Dame program and Marcus Freeman of, would Freeman be a candidate for NFL jobs? And I think that Freeman's tried to swat all that away. Let's see about this one. Unlike our franchise in Atlanta, the Steelers, I know they haven't really won at the highest level in a while, but they really are thought to be a model franchise. Rooney family, very classy, thought to be. That's a very attractive job. And if they're willing to pay the big dollars, is this the kind of thing where Marcus Freeman would say, you know what, this is an NFL job I am willing to take, even though I think most people think he's set up pretty well at Notre Dame for next year. Is this the kind of job he would be willing to take? I would be watching that closely. UGA girl Chris says, have a great day. Y'all hit the thumbs up. Thanks for encouraging those likes, Christy. I appreciate that. And thank you for being a part of our show today. Good to see you as always. Jeremy Harbin pointing out, Steelers haven't had a losing season since 2003. Yeah, it's an amazing run. At a certain point, that almost hurts you as much as it helps you, but yeah, that's an amazing thing. Josh Bird says that Tomlin's daughter's a gymnast at Georgia. I didn't know that. I guess other people knew that. I didn't know that. How about Tomlin to Atlanta? I think Falcons fans would probably like it, but I don't know if that's what they're going to do. He may be also ready for a break. Sometimes these coaches, even coaches that like coaching, and Tomlin's still pretty young, right? He certainly looks young. Sometimes you want that gap year, but maybe he just wants a gap year or two. HB 1201 says Gunner's not a pocket passer. Bobo asked Gunner to become a pocket passer and with the game at the end. Like, I get being upset that Georgia lost the game. I do get that. But we got to be careful with these grand proclamations when, the Tennessee game happened. Now, you can decide for yourself what you think it means, but you can't pretend it didn't happen. Ole Miss in October, that happened. You can decide for yourself what you think it means, but it did happen. There were moments this year where Gunner Stockton played as well as the best quarterback in the country would be expected to play. Was he always at that consistent level? He was not. But, you got to be careful only grabbing one set of facts when it comes to making your opinion. If you judge Gunner by his worst moments, well, you've got a case to be made that, he's not good at all. If you judge Gunner by his best moments, you could say, well, he should have won the Heisman Trophy. The truth is the totality of all of that data. And let's try to keep the full data set in play when we're having these conversations. Dennis Wilson says, there is no coach in the world that can help the Falcons and the Dolphins win, just saying. Yeah, I don't know, man. I think the Falcons are messed up. The Miami situation, I don't know quite as well. I really don't. I know McDaniel at one point in time was like the toast of the town, and for whatever reason, that fell apart. I mean, if Miami gets quarterback figured out, like I said, I won't pretend to know much about that franchise overall. The Atlanta situation, my fear is that Matt Ryan, who I do like, and I think that Ryan's probably a smart guy, and I'll make a big bet on intelligence, high IQ. I think that Ryan's probably a high IQ guy. I think, Wonderlic test, things like that would suggest that. So I'll make a bet on a high IQ guy figuring it out. But you can't tell me from day one Matt Ryan is running an NFL franchise. He's just not. It's a huge job. It's a huge job. And someone who's, considering he's only been a quarterback and a broadcaster, Ryan's essentially never had a job the way most of us think of jobs. And now he's going to have a gigantic job like running an NFL franchise. Of course, from day one, he's not doing that. So the question remains, well, who really is behind the scenes running all of this? And we're told, well, it's not Rich McKay anymore. Okay, that's fine. But is it the same infrastructure that McKay put in place? Because that's the issue, I think, for the Falcons is that Ryan essentially is a veneer covering up what's essentially the same old Falcons and the same old decision-making process that's resulted in a lack of playoffs now for 8 straight years. That's my fear. I do think Ryan makes Atlanta as a franchise more marketable in parts of town where nobody cares about the Falcons. Listen, I cannot remember the last time in a conversation in my normal life, just walking around the streets, somebody brought up the Falcons. In my world where I live, no one cares about the Falcons at all. And I'm a very college football guy. Of course, that's the case. But I don't even really know that many NFL fans, at least when it comes to the local NFL team, the Falcons. I just don't. The Falcons could not be less relevant in my kind of country corner of the extreme, outer limits, not quite suburb, rural area where I live. No one cares about the Falcons at all. Now, maybe Matt Ryan, because he had success here, maybe he makes the franchise more relevant in pockets of the community where they just couldn't care less. But in terms of actually making better decisions, I can't really be convinced that Ryan's the one making the decision. The press conference they had yesterday doesn't do much to prove that to me either. Blind Squirrel Sports agreeing with me. Jim K says BA is living a sheltered life. It is my goal. My goal is to live as sheltered a life as I possibly can. I think of shelter as a very good thing. That is my goal. Bales R says bring back the red helmets. That's the other thing they could do. And I'm not superstitious, but they always win when they wear the throwbacks, and they do look good. They do look sharp. They really do. When I was a kid, they wore red on red. I'm too young to remember or know about the red on black, which I guess throws back to the Steve Bartkowski, like the early 80s, maybe before that. It is a sharp look. It really is a sharp look. Tony Huff says, I watch the Falcons if I want a good nap. Yeah, I'm a little bit like, the meme of Rob Lowe wearing the NFL hat? That's what my family sort of is. We're a red zone 3 p.m. type of thing. When I say my family, I mean my son and me. Like my son is obsessed with college football, has no emotion whatsoever for the Falcons. No emotion. Now you can say, well, he's your kid, of course, but he's different than me in some respects. He likes certain things that I don't like. But I mean, there is just something about like Northeast Georgia or northern parts of the state, maybe South Georgia too, where, actually definitely South Georgia too, where we're just college football people. We just are. We're just college football people. And it takes a lot for the NFL team to cut through that clutter. And the Falcons, most of my lifetime, have not been able to do it. Sedgwick Graham says, be a best fact in the world. UG will have a lot of hungry players in the field, ready to hunt in 234 days. Boy, I love that. I love that. Blind Squirrel Sports says, the pre-Jerry Glanville Falcons uniforms were elite. Yeah, that was back when it was red, silver. It's pretty sharp. But when they first went to the back and black, Jerry Glanville, now that was a time in which my community paid attention to the Falcons. Y'all remember, I think is it the season opening game in, was it 1990? I forget what year it was. Glanville's first game against the Oilers, which is ironically the team he used to coach. They were wild. Jerry Glanville, for a minute, I don't know how much they really won, but I tell you this, he had some relevance. Way up there in Redneckville where I grew up, when Jerry Glanville was doing his thing with the Falcons, there was some relevance there. There was some relevance there.
Is there anything more bizarro world, speaking of that era, than Larry Munson calling those Jerry Glanville games?
A lot of people don't know this, that Munson, that's a good point, Jay, that Munson was the play-by-play announcer of the Falcons. And I'll tell you the one you need to find, and there may be another call, but Deion Sanders' first punt return, so it's like his Falcons debut. I don't know if it's his first punt return, but it was a punt return in his debut for the Falcons. Punt, I think they're playing the Rams maybe. Ball goes through Deion's hands, picks it up off the ground, and just did Deion Sanders stuff, high step into the end zone. Munson had a really good call of that. That's the only one that's the only Falcons call from Munson I have any memory of. But for a few years, he was the Falcons play-by-play man. It really was. People don't remember that, but I do vaguely remember that. Jim K 7882 says, "Do we have defensive coaches up in the box because Kirby and Schumann didn't see our safety lineup on the wrong side?" Yeah, they do have defensive coach in the box. They do have them there, yes. Sam Burks also liked the Falcons when they switched to the black. He says, "I didn't care that they had Prime. I wanted them, the Braves and the Hawks, to leave Georgia." Yeah, for whatever reason, I grew up a huge Braves fan. Even the Braves were terrible. Like when I was a kid, not to make this like remember when, you have no idea how hard it was. The Braves finished last place every year. Every year. Lost 100 games every year. Set a National League record for the most losses to begin the season. You know how excited everybody is on opening day? Oh, this is going to be a fun year. Good to have baseball back. In 88, the Braves set the National League record for the most losses to begin a season. Like, this is what I grew up with. But I still love the Braves. We had a Braves games a pretty good bit. Man, we didn't go to Falcons games. I don't really even know why necessarily. It wasn't my choice. I was a kid. I just did whatever my parents did. But we did not go to Falcons games. State 2015 says, "Does Bo Walker have a larger role on third down this year?" I do think third down is going to be a pretty interesting issue. And I do think who they choose to throw the ball to is going to be a pretty interesting issue too. I think those are all pretty interesting questions, how they handle all that. Frogger 2000 says, from NOLA, he's from NOLA, says, "Saints fans couldn't be more in love with the Saints, and that's for the most part an average franchise. They're still crazy for LSU. Weird that Falcons fans don't have that support." I've always thought the same thing, is that there is this thing in Louisiana where LSU fans are also Saints fans. Both. They're big fans of both. We don't have that in Atlanta, and I don't 100% understand why that is. I don't. But you do see more of that in New Orleans. If someone wants to do some research on that and explain why that is, I'd be willing to listen to it. But I have also noticed that it is different. It is. It is different. I think that, Frogger, if I had to guess, and I love Louisiana. I don't want to go back to New Orleans anytime soon because it's not been very kind to Georgia, but I do love the state of Louisiana. Louisiana is a very particular state. For instance, for a long time, the hardest state to get a recruit from was Louisiana. That LSU in Louisiana just got who it wanted. Alabama, when it really had it going with Saban, would get some guys, but Louisiana is just always the hardest state to get somebody out of. They play rough down there. They throw elbows. You got to really set your mind to it. To go into Louisiana and pull out one of their prospects. It's just hard to get a guy out of Louisiana. That's just always the way that's been. So I think of Louisianans, is how you say it, as a very particular people. I don't mean that in any way negative. I mean that in a really positive way. I said before, I'm very proud to be from Georgia. Very proud to be a Southerner. That kind of thing means something to me. Well, I think it really means something to Louisiana people. They are. Louisiana people are very proud to be from Louisiana. And so, therefore, that might lead to more support for the local NFL team. Whereas, Atlanta and Georgia are always pretty split. There are a lot of people who think of themselves as being from Atlanta, not Georgia. The inverse is also true. And it seems like that has probably hurt the Falcon support statewide in a way that doesn't, I think, exist as much in Louisiana. There may be fewer transplants there. A lot of people who are just from Louisiana, and so is there ancestors. They are just very Louisiana-type people, and that probably has benefited the Saints fan support over the years, if I had to guess. All right, we're going to get ready to go. Jeremy Smith pointing out, we should mention this during the show. So, and this is always confusing. I believe the right way to say this is the coaches have unanimously recommended a change of the redshirt rule. I don't think that necessarily means the rule has changed yet, right? But right now you can play up to 4 games without burning a red shirt. I believe it's poised to now be changed to you can play up to 9 games. Ultimately, where they think this is going is right now you have 5 years to play 4 seasons. You may get to the point where you have 5 years to play 5 seasons, where you can just play and have an extra year of eligibility. If you do want it, there are some legal complications with that. But that's where this is probably going as a way of mitigating the Diego Pavia, Trinidad Chambliss style lawsuits. Now, some people are saying, well, hold on. If you just add eligibility, the players are just going to want more eligibility on top of that, which is probably true. But this is a half measure, literally speaking, to solve this problem on the short-term basis of, well, we can't quite go 5 for 5 right now. What if we just make 9 games and then you can redshirt? That's what I think this is right now. But I believe, and if I'm wrong, y'all tell me, and I really will correct myself. This is just a recommendation for the coaches. This was not a rule that was passed yesterday. I think that's the case. DT says he thinks that Dwight Phillips should be the third down back. You know, as speedy as he is, you think he'd be a perfect candidate, but they don't ever throw to him. I don't think they threw to him all year long. And it seems like he'd be made for that, but for whatever reason, and maybe he grows into that role. For whatever reason, they have not viewed him as a passing game weapon, even though his speed and his elusiveness, he really knows how to make people miss. That would seem to be perfect, but they are not, to this point, have not really thrown to him. So there you go. All right, we're going to stop it there for right now. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised, including, I think tomorrow it's supposed to be crazy cold. I think that's the case. I'm not a very good forecast reader, but I believe it's supposed to be crazy cold. So think about your heating system and what RS Andrews can do to get that thing tuned back up to factory fresh specs for you. That's what they're all about. So find them online at rsandrews.com and you may be able to get some new life out of that old heating unit. And wouldn't that be a very good thing? Online, rsandrews.com. Y'all have a great day. See you back tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, poured by Dr. Pepper. We'll talk to you then.